BOOOOOOOOM? BOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOO For your quick build, aspects are Winter Shroud, Gunpowder Gamble, Knife Trick, Duskfield Gamblers, Fragments of Purpose, Protection, Hope, Dawn, Command. Here is your mod setup. Super should be Goldie or Tether. Exotic armor is either a Spirit of Foe Tracer Certarachne class item or Fortune's Favour. Goldie's the super for the class item, Tether for Fortune's Favour. Exotic guns Heirloom, look for Chill Clip, Attrition Orbs, or Good Dark Transcendence guns. Artifact is Implement of Curiosity. Guys, something about this build clicks with me so much, and the whole thing can just be summed up to pointing the explodey end of the binoculars gun at the crit of anything with a big health bar, pressing shoot and watching them vanish. Plus, who doesn't like a rhythm game in their FPS? Dun, 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 boom! The core of this build is Heirloom, as about everything the build does revolves around making it chunk as much as possible and playing off the fact it applies Scorch to make ignitions, with those ignitions being damage boosted from all of the weapon damage buffs you're going to be applying. For the crossbow itself, it uses special ammo, fires explodey bolts, and has the balanced heat frame, meaning if you vent this at 90% heat or above, much shorter reload time. For actually shooting the thing, you can hip fire it, but ADSing is how you're going to be using this against anything with an actual decent health bar. As for doing so, the gun begins charging up levels. You can do a weeny shot at 1 charge, a big shot at 2, and a big shot at 3 charges, scaling in damage and AoE radius per each level. And with the Catalyst, you're going to apply 20 Scorch on direct hit per each charge level, reaching 60 Scorch at max charge, with the gun just in general dealing an extra 10% damage to scorched enemies, and having incandescent too. Caveat of all of that goodness is that on firing, the higher you've charged the gun, the more heat you're going to generate, and for ADSing the gun, which you have to do in order to build up charges, you generate heat. This is something to our benefit though, I'll get round to that a bit later. Whilst we're on exotics, let's talk armor, as they're both where we get survivability and damage from in the build. With Fortune's Favour, you're going to passively build up Void Overshield after being out of a fight for 5 seconds or for landing a kill whilst at full health, which is kinda cool. The part of this we want for the build is that whenever you have Void Overshield active, weapons deal 15% increased damage, but specifically with heat weapons, they deal an extra 20% damage, and this is its own separate damage buff that scales alongside weapon surges too. Pretty much, Heirloom drops absolute bombs when you have Void Overshield up, which is why with this armor you want Tether. Facet of Purpose gives you Void Overshield for picking up an orb, and with this build you make a load of orbs, so it's a lot of free damage. Otherwise, you're going to want a Foe Tracer Certarachne class item. 10 seconds of Woven Mail for throwing a nade is so good, especially when you pair this up with Faceted Purpose Restoration with Golden Gun. And that's only half the exotic. Foe Tracer will make it so for landing ability damage against anything higher than rank and file, you'll get a matching 4 times weapon surge, so an extra 25% damage for the bow. The way I look at these two is like this. Bit more of a glass cannon, but if played well will reward you with much more damage. There's not much that will live through a few Fortune's Favour boosted shots from Heirloom outside of proper bosses. The gun chunks with a capital C when you are using Fortune's Favour. The class item though has a little less damage, but the safety net and extra aggressiveness that Woven Mail Restoration gives. Plus you also get a load more stats to play around with, as you don't have to run double Solar Surges, but double Weapon Font instead, freeing up a lot of stat points. And for the rest of the build, on aspects you'll want GPG and Winter Shroud. With Shroud on slowing enemies you get 300% increased class regen, and on dodging you apply 60 slow around you and get a 50% DR for 4 seconds. Pretty much. More melees and dark debuffs the aspect, which is amazing specifically with Heirloom as it interacts with Cauterized Darkness on the artifact in such a good way. A bit more on that in the interactions part. And GPG is here just because it's playing good at what it does. It's a throwable ignition, clears out ads so well, and for Certarachne it also means another way to get Woven Mail. For your other abilities, Knife Trick is going to be your melee. Heirloom is damage buff 10% against Scorch targets, so throwing these out before firing is just more free damage for the gun. But as the gun also applies Scorch on direct hits, it is a great follow-up after firing the gun. Your main combo in this build really revolves around this melee and its ability to apply Scorch and Heirloom. Your class is going to be Gamblers for more knives and your Grenaders Duskfield. For Fragments, Purpose, Protection, Hope, Dawn, and Command. This build does a great job at making orbs, so lots of Void Overshield and Restoration from Purpose. Protection is DR for being around 3 or more enemies. Hope is 60% additional base class regen for having elemental buffs active, which pairs nicely with Purpose, both exotics giving elemental buffs, and also Dawn, which is radiant for 5 seconds on landing powered melee hits. Facetive command on killing a suppressed or frozen enemy makes Void Breaches or Stasis Shards respectively, but what you want from this really is the reload you get for suppressing or freezing an enemy, which lets you skirt around Heirloom's reload and keeps you in fight rather than having to reload in the middle of one. This does have a 4-second cooldown on those reloads, so just be aware of that. And for the important part, I'm gonna start with the playstyle, as when I first picked the build up, I found the way I normally play and the way that the build wants to be played were pretty different, in that you have got to take your time with Heirloom. I play fast and I was trying to force that onto Heirloom, which really needs time to build up damage. Don't take that as you can't play the build aggressively, you definitely can, and I hope the background footage does some justice to show that, but give Heirloom time to breathe and it'll reward you with a load of damage and very consistent ignitions. This is even more the case with Fortune's Favour, in that for being reckless you're going to lose Void Overshield from taking damage, so your 20% bonus damage is tied to playing slightly more passively. You'll hopefully also see that this build is one that's very combo heavy on abilities. Ignitions in this build will only really come from that pairing of Heirloom alongside Throwing Knives. These two are made for each other, so as much as possible combo them. It's why Winter Shroud is here, more dodges means more knives, means more ignitions, and why Transcendence is so good here, because each knife alongside Heirloom can turn into an ignition on an enemy. Importantly though, the stasis package in this build has another purpose, in that it big time enables Cauterized Darkness on the artifact, where solar damage dealt to any non-boss enemy affected by a darkness debuff deals 75% increased damage, so Duskfield, Winter Shroud, Hailfire Spike, or a Chill Clip gun if you take one, are all ways you can prime enemies for Heirloom and Throwing Knives to hit some really high damage numbers. And speaking of damage, there is one more artifact mod that helps Heirloom out in Argent Quiver. When you reload, you eat up an armor charge and the next 3 bow shots you fire off are damage boosted by 35%, so all you have to do for free damage is ADS for like half a second, build up some heat, quick tap reload, the buff is then ready. Although any reloads you do whilst you have Godslayer Broadheads active will not eat up any more armor charges, but if you switch weapons to anything that's not a bow, they will fall off. So generally try to fire off your shots before you want to switch weapons. Now I'm telling you this tech because you really want to be trying to not reload Heirloom. You will almost always have a Duskfield or Hailfire Spike on an enemy that the gun is aimed at, which means on guessing freeze, you're going to be auto-loading Heirloom. If you go Knife Trick, Duskfield, then ADS, you're able to build the gun up to a second charge, fire it off, then command goes off. With Hailfire during Transcendence, exact same thing, but you have time to build the gun up to 3 charges instead. This fragment really just means Heirloom doesn't have a second of downtime. You don't even need to have abilities for this either. A Chill Clip gun does the exact same thing, but the moment that your freeze is about to go off, switch to Heirloom and you're going to reload it from command. So never worry about bringing this gun to its overheated state, because you should always have freeze to bring it back down to 0. Using this fragment well is genuinely the skill gap of the build, in that it lets you use Heirloom so much more efficiently and means your damage is going to stay really high. Apart from that, I will say that this build took me a little while to get into the rhythm of it, but now that I am, it is such a rewarding build to play and gives you so much more once you nail its gameplay loop and get used to using it. For guns, I'm going to recommend a few things. This build makes a load of orbs but equally eats them up just as fast with how often you're going to want to be using Special Finisher, so attrition orbs is great on any gun. I've already touched on Chill Clip briefly for command, but strand debuff perks can also work really nicely here, in that it's another trigger for Cauterized Darkness. Your Dark Bar will also be the slower charging of the two, so anything that's efficient at building up Dark Transcendence is great. Although, if you do say take a Chill Clip special, I'd also really recommend a Dark Heavy. It'll help balance your Transcendence gains. Although specific to Fortune's Favour, Heat weapons get that 20% damage bonus over 15%, so a loadout I would highly recommend is Bitter End, Heirloom and Conspiracy Honed. Every gun is going to get that unique damage boost. Also, from the amount of orbs that this build makes that you then spend on Special Finisher, plus the stats you run, and the armor sets I'm going to recommend in a bit, double special is absolutely something you should run. It is the most efficient way to play the build guns wise. For your stats, you'll want 200 weapon, around 100 class, then at least 50 melee, with the remaining stats being split between grenade, super, or extra melee stat up to 100. Onto armor mods. Helmet is 2 special ammo finders and harmonic siphon with Goldie, or solar siphon with Fortune's Favor, with 1 ammo finder being swappable for super fonts. Arms is 1 firepower and 2 melee or grenade fonts depending on what stats you need or want more. Chest is double charged up, harmonic ammo generation with Goldie, or solar ammo gem with Fortune's Favor. Legs is stacks on stacks, then depending on exotic armor, 2 solar surges with Fortune's Favor, or 2 weapon fonts with Foe Tracer Certarachne. Class item is then Reaper, Special Finisher, Powerful Attraction. Fair enough if you're scratching your head after hearing that, as there's Special Finisher, font mods, and Argent Quiver on the artifact that are all now fighting over armor charges, which segues nicely. For armor sets, you are looking for any that are able to make orbs or generate ammo. What you've been watching in the background is the Roots of Nightmares 2-piece and Europa 2-piece, and I've often struggled to spend orbs as quickly as these 2 sets can make them alongside all the other orb gem from the mod setup. I do generally prefer the orb gen sets because they give you ammo through Special Finisher and give you faster purpose buffs. So the Vault of Glass 4-piece is another set I rank really highly. But for your ammo ones, the King's Fall 2-piece is a great one, the Gambit 4-piece can be nice too. Just anything that gives ammo or orbs is what you're going to want to. And lastly is your artifact, which should look like this. These two I've already covered in Cauterized Darkness and Argent Quiver, but in the first column you're going to want to take Refreshed Threads and Fervor and Chill. Second column is Elemental Daze, Elemental Coalescence, and Cauterized. Final column is Argent Quiver and Shield Crush. It is worth mentioning that with the Elemental Pickup package, you can switch Shield Crush with Elemental Overdrive, where on getting an Elemental Pickup, element matching guns get a 22% damage buff, and this stacks multiplicatively with Solar Surges, so something you can absolutely try on the Certarachne version, as you'll be making Fire Sprites, which means Heirloom is damage boosted even more. And that's the build. I hope you enjoy. Heirloom on release was a gun that wasn't all that strong, and I think because of that, even though it got some really strong buffs in Monument of Triumph, people have been overlooking it a bit because of how it launched. Hopefully this will show you otherwise and that the gun is really worth your time. That is about it from me though. See ya!